"Get your hands off that horse, boy. You don't belong in here." The words hit the stable corridor like a riding crop on stone. Chandler Weston didn't even look up from adjusting his cream-colored gloves, one finger at a time, the way a man adjusts things he already owns. 3 other jockeys stood behind him. Every groom in the aisle went still. Not one of them moved, not one of them spoke. The boy they were talking to was named Elijah Cole, 17 years old, 5'6", second-hand barn jacket with someone else's name on the chest pocket. He had been mucking stalls since 4 in the morning, and his hands, calloused and clean, were wrapped around an old leather halter, dark with age, with 2 small initials stamped near the buckle that no one in that stable had ever thought to read. He didn't flinch. He looked at Chandler Weston with the quietest eyes you have ever seen on a 17-year-old boy, and he said, "Yes, sir," and he stepped back. Nobody in that corridor knew who Elijah really was, not yet. But Chandler Weston had just made the most expensive mistake of his riding career. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere, and then proved every single person in the room completely wrong? Hold on to that feeling. Let me take you back. 22 hours before that moment, before the cameras arrived, before the name Elijah Cole changed everything, there was just a boy, a barn, and a horse that nobody else could touch. The Cedar Creek Equestrian Complex sat on 400 acres of Virginia bluegrass country, hosted the Carrington Classic every September. Prize purse $180,000, entry fee $3,500 per rider, and was exactly the kind of place where the horses had better dental plans than most American families. Elijah Cole was there as a groom, $12 an hour, cash at end of week. He caught the 5:14 bus from Denton Creek every morning, 47 minutes each way, and was always first through the stable door before the sun touched the ridge. He knew the name of every horse on the property, which ones liked their oats wet, which stalls ran drafty after 9. He knew these things not because anyone taught him, but because he paid attention the way only a person who deeply loves something ever does. He lived with his grandmother, Nora Cole, in a 2-bedroom house on Tanner Road, blue tarp over the northeast corner of the roof. Fixed income. She ironed his barn jacket every Sunday night like it was going somewhere important, because she believed it was. The iron hissed and steamed, and she said the same thing every time. "You press what you wear, you press how the world sees you, baby." In the inside pocket of that jacket, Elijah kept a small square of old leather, a nameplate cut from something much older, with 2 initials stamped in a tiny horseshoe. J.C. His grandmother had given it to him on his 15th birthday. It had belonged to his grandfather. "Your grandfather understood horses the way most people never will," she told him. "You've got his hands." She never explained more than that. That nameplate was the most important thing Elijah Cole owned. Now, the horse. His name was Damascus. Full registered name Damascus Fire, 4 years old, 17 hands, coat the color of a copper penny in direct sunlight, purchased at auction 18 months ago for $1, $1 million cash, by the Classic's principal sponsor, a man named Gerald Hargrove. In 14 competitive attempts across 3 facilities, Damascus had thrown every jockey who ever mounted him. 3 required medical attention. He was widely considered unrideable. But Elijah had been coming to Damascus's stall for 8 months. Not because he was assigned there, he wasn't, but because he heard the horse's distress from across the barn and couldn't leave a sound like that alone. He'd stood outside the stall for 40 minutes the first night without speaking, letting the silence do its work, the way, he somehow knew, you were supposed to. By the 3rd week, Damascus pressed his nose against Elijah's open palm every morning like a greeting. Nobody at Cedar Creek understood this. Nobody tried to. What they also didn't know was that 2 days earlier, a phone call had been made. Gerald Hargrove's attorney to a man in Lexington, Kentucky named August Whitfield. Not an attorney, not a trainer in any conventional sense, but the most respected horse handler alive on the North American continent. And that call had set something in motion that was now rolling toward Cedar Creek like a weather front no one had thought to check the forecast for. 22 hours. Remember that number. Chandler Weston had filed an objection the previous week about Elijah's presence in the pretrial preparation area. No specific rule cited, no specific incident, just careful language about maintaining the quality of the environment. Roy Dykes, the head stable manager, had read it and put it in a drawer and said nothing. The particular cowardice of a man who has confused keeping his head down with keeping the peace. So when Chandler walked into the main corridor at 7:15 and saw Elijah at Damascus's stall door, calm, jacket pressed, that old halter in his hands, something in him shortened. "Get your hands off that horse, boy. You don't belong in here." 3 grooms in the corridor, 2 junior riders at the far end, Roy Dykes 10 feet away with a clipboard. Silence. The kind of silence where everyone is deciding in real time how much trouble they're willing to take on. Elijah stepped back, said, "Yes, sir, yo, level." Then Chandler did the second thing. The thing that crossed the line there is no coming back from. "That raggedy piece of junk," he said, pointing at the halter in Elijah's hands. "Put it on the hook outside before you go back to wherever you came from. It's cluttering the space." He reached out and took the halter from Elijah's hands before the boy could react, looked at it for exactly 1 second, read nothing into the JC near the buckle, the way things mean nothing to a man who has never had to assign meaning to objects to survive. Then he hung it above Damascus's waste bucket in the back corner of the stall, the place where things get forgotten. Elijah stood very still. Something moved behind his eyes, deep and quiet, like water under ice. His right hand closed into a fist at his side, and then slowly it opened. Go back and watch that moment when Elijah's hand opens, because that is the moment a 17-year-old boy chose dignity over reaction, and it is the reason for everything that came after. Damascus, still at the back of the stall during all of this, watching, began to pace. At 9:15, Roy Dykes reassigned Elijah to perimeter duties. East paddock, away from the stables, away from Damascus. He did it without explanation, out of the quiet cowardice of a man who has let an objection sit in a drawer too long to admit it publicly. Elijah went without complaint. He racked his tools, took his rake to the paddock, and began working with his full attention on the task in front of him, the way he approached everything regardless of who was watching. By 9:30, Damascus was a crisis. Preston Albright, the jockey contracted to ride him in the trials, couldn't get through the stall door. Damascus turned, stamped twice, and produced a sound that made Preston reconsider. He tried again at 9:50 with 2 handlers, sideways. At 10:15, the head veterinarian arrived, checked vitals, and recommended the horse not be run. Chandler Weston, standing nearby, said to no one in particular, "Pull the horse." Always was a waste of time. Gerald Hargrove was 12 feet away. His expression was the face of a man who has absorbed bad news before and learned to absorb it without letting it reach his eyes. He looked at Damascus, then at Roy Dykes. "The boy," he said, "the one who comes in the mornings. Where is he?" Roy Dykes said, "East paddock." Hargrove looked at him for 3 full seconds. "Get him." At the far end of the corridor, one of the 3 men who had arrived in black SUVs at 6:48 that morning, before any jockey, before any official, allowed himself the smallest possible smile. His name was August Whitfield, and he had not come to Cedar Creek for Damascus Fire. He had come for Elijah. August Whitfield was 60 years old, born in the horse country of Aiken, South Carolina. 2 world records in competitive equestrian training, both before the age of 35, consultant to 4 Olympic teams. By any reasonable measure, the most accomplished horse trainer alive in North America. He had driven past Cedar Creek 6 months earlier, on a morning he wasn't supposed to be there, and watched through a fence for 45 minutes while a 17-year-old boy in a pressed jacket brought Damascus Fire to the stall door with nothing but his hands and his voice. He had gone home and made 3 phone calls. Those calls uncovered this. Elijah's grandfather, James Cole, the JC in the leather halter, had been a trainer at the Ashford Stables in Fauquier County, Virginia. In 1971, he trained a horse named River Covenant to the fastest regional qualifying time on record, a mark that stood for 18 years. He did it without a license, without a sponsor, and without recognition, because in 1971, Fauquier County had certain ideas about which names went on certain plaques. James Cole was told his record would be attributed to the horse's bloodline. His name would not appear. He went home, taught his children everything he knew, and kept 1 halter, the only proof that the record had been made by human hands. August Whitfield had the original timing sheets. He had a Polaroid photograph, 1 photograph, of James Cole standing with River Covenant after that qualifying run, 1 hand on the horse's neck, looking directly at the camera with the same quiet that ran in the Cole family like a current through still water. He had brought that photograph. He had also brought 2 representatives from the National Equestrian Training Foundation who had their own documents to present. The trials were scheduled for 11. It was 9:50. Elijah didn't hurry when Roy Dykes found him. He racked his tools neatly, walked back through the paddock gate, and entered the corridor. He saw the crowd, riders, handlers, Gerald Hargrove, 3 men he didn't recognize. He saw the halter still hanging above the waste bucket, exactly where Chandler Weston had put it. He stopped, and then Damascus, who had been pacing the back of his stall for 90 minutes, who had turned 2 people out of his door and made a veteran jockey reconsider his career choices, Damascus stopped, turned, walked to the stall door, and pressed his nose against the bars, long and slow, the way a person exhales after holding something for a very long time. The corridor went absolutely silent. Elijah walked to the stall. He didn't speak. He reached through the bars and placed his open hand against the side of Damascus's face, just below the eye. Damascus leaned into it like a ship finding harbor. August Whitfield took 3 steps forward. "Son," he said in the voice of a man who doesn't need volume to be heard, "I've been watching you for 6 months. Your grandfather was the finest natural horseman I ever saw in my life, and I think you are better than he was." The corridor did not breathe. Elijah turned. "You knew my grandfather." Whitfield reached into his jacket. He held up the Polaroid, yellowed with age, a man standing with a horse in afternoon sunlight, one hand on the horse's neck, looking at the camera with eyes that were Elijah's eyes. Elijah looked at the photograph for a long time. His hand stayed on Damascus's face. "My grandmother kept the halter," he said quietly. "I know," Whitfield said. "Will you get it?" Elijah walked to the back of the stall. Damascus moved aside without being asked. He reached up and lifted the old leather halter down from the nail above the waste bucket, the place where things get forgotten, the place where Chandler Weston had put it 2 hours earlier, and he held it in both hands in the light where everyone could see it. "J.C.," he said. Not loudly, just clearly. "James Cole, my grandfather." Whitfield said the second thing. He said it without hurrying, the voice of a man who has chosen this moment carefully. "The 2 gentlemen behind me are from the National Equestrian Training Foundation. They are here because I called them. They would like to speak with you about a training scholarship. Full license certification, 4-year curriculum, stipend of $2,400 a month." He paused. "They would also like to speak to Cedar Creek's management about the formal complaint they are opening regarding conditions in this facility's groom corps." At the far end of the corridor, Chandler Weston's face did what faces do when the scaffolding comes down. The color left in stages. First the certainty, then the performance, then something underneath all of it that had never been examined, something small and afraid and alone in a corridor full of witnesses. Marcus Fell looked at the floor. Devin Sloan walked out. Tyler Burke studied his boots as though they contained answers. Not one of them had a word. Gerald Hargrove asked one thing. Walk Damascus through the trial course, not to jump, not to compete. Just to walk, to let the horse move. Elijah put the old halter on Damascus, not competition equipment. The old one, the JC and the horseshoe, 60 years of hands worn into the leather. It fit the way things fit when they have found their way home. They walked out at 11:40. 230 people stood in the viewing areas. Elijah Cole walked out with no introduction, no announcement, one hand on Damascus's neck, and the horse walked beside him with the collected, fluid stride of an animal that has finally found the ground under its feet. People stopped talking. They walked the perimeter once, then twice. On the third pass, Damascus shifted his gait. Not at command, but at something passed between them below the level of language, the thing that James Cole had known in 1971, and that August Whitfield had spent 60 years trying to put into words and had mostly given up on, because some things live in the hands and not in the vocabulary. When Elijah brought Damascus back through the gate, August Whitfield was there with the foundation documents. And Damascus Fire, $1, 1 million, 4 years old, 0 successful jumping courses on record, lowered his great head until his nose nearly touched the ground in front of Elijah's feet. Not a trained bow, not theater. Just a horse settling into the presence of the person it trusts most in the world, making itself small before someone it knows will not misuse that smallness. 230 people saw it, 12 of them had their phones out. By midnight, 1, 4 million views. By morning, 4, 7 million. By end of week, 11,200,000. The headline in every regional paper ran almost identically. The stable boy the jockeys tried to ban, and the horse that knelt. The formal complaint filed by the National Equestrian Training Foundation covered 14 specific incidents of discriminatory treatment in Cedar Creek's groom corps over 32 months. 11 involved workers who were not white. 6 had been quietly documented by Roy Dykes in notebooks he had kept and never submitted. Those notebooks were subpoenaed. He cooperated fully. He told the investigator he had known and had not acted, because he wasn't sure what acting would cost him. He was reassigned and later resigned. He was not cruel. He was the other thing, the thing that cruelty depends on to survive. Chandler Weston received a formal censure, his first. 3 more followed within the calendar year. As the door his censure opened, let others through it. His father's board positions came under review. 2 were not renewed. The Cedar Creek audit found systematic underpayment averaging $2, 70 per hour below comparable facilities. Back pay settlements of $214,000 were issued to 22 current and former grooms. 6 received formal employment contracts for the first time in their tenure. Elijah Cole enrolled in the Foundation's certification program that October. August Whitfield agreed to serve as his primary mentor. The first time in 11 years Whitfield had taken a mentorship. His public statement said only that he had made a promise to a woman named Nora Cole in Denton Creek, Virginia, and that some promises take 60 years and 2 generations to fulfill. Gerald Hargrove commissioned a second halter for Damascus, full competition leather, hand-tooled, and had the craftsman stamp the initials in the same place, the same curved horseshoe, JC. He handed it to Elijah without ceremony. Finish what your grandfather started. The original halter, the one that had hung above a waste bucket for 2 hours on a September morning, Elijah gave to his grandmother. She put it on the shelf above the television, next to the photograph of James Cole she had kept for 41 years, and she said nothing. She didn't need to. Some things are not spoken, some things are simply returned. Nora Cole ironed Elijah's jacket every Sunday night for the rest of her life. Because the measure of a person is not what the world allows them to own, but what they carry forward, carefully, quietly, through every room that tried to take it. 1 year later, Damascus Fire completed a full sanctioned jumping course at the Meridian Classic in Charlottesville. All 6 jumps, no throws. Preston Albright dismounted and shook Elijah Cole's hand in the middle of the ring and held it longer than handshakes usually hold. The James Cole Fellowship, co-funded by August Whitfield and Gerald Hargrove, offers annual scholarships to 4 young people from working family backgrounds entering equestrian professions. The only requirement beyond the application is a handwritten letter explaining why horses matter to you. In its first year, 63 letters arrived. Elijah Cole answered each one personally. If this story moved you, if you felt what it means when a boy stays calm in a room that is trying to diminish him and waits for the truth to come on its own schedule, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe if you haven't yet. And I want to ask you something real. Have you ever held on to something that belonged to someone you loved, something that carried their name, their proof, their quiet labor, because the world hadn't gotten around to honoring it yet? Leave that in the comments. I read them all. Here's what really gets me about this. It's not the 11 million views, it's not the lawsuits, or the settlements, or even Damascus clearing his last fence clean. Those are the results, and results are real, but they are not the thing. The thing is, a 17-year-old boy in a second-hand jacket, in a corridor where every person with any power has decided to look at the floor, choosing to open his hand instead of make a fist. That is not smallness. That is the most specific kind of courage there is, the kind that doesn't ask for an audience, the kind that doesn't know yet the audience is coming. 60 years before Elijah stood in that corridor, his grandfather stood in a different one. Different state, different horses, same room. The room where someone who earned something is told their name doesn't fit on the plaque. James Cole went home. He kept the halter. He taught what he knew. He believed, without proof, that the hands he was building in the people he loved would find their way to the right horse at the right moment. He was right. He was right by 60 years and a Polaroid photograph and a stamp in the leather the size of a thumbnail. What is your JC moment? What are you carrying forward from someone who never got their name on the plaque? The knowledge they passed to you, the way they showed you how to be still in a room that wants you gone. Tell me below, because I believe there are more of those stories than the world has plaques for, and every single one of them deserves to be heard.